Well, thanks for making the time to do the podcast, I guess, video podcast. We're doing both now. So we've only had a few video ones. So thanks for doing it.
I'm glad I was able to be one of the brave ones.
Yeah, exactly. Most inspectors usually say, "Oh, you don't want my face on camera," but they do just fine when we do video. So,
well, great.
Yeah, how'd the summer treat you guys?
Summer was great. I mean, summer's an interesting time for us. Obviously, it's not as busy from an event standpoint, but
Right.
we're really busy preparing for events in the fall.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually when a lot of our insureds renew their insurance. If you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. A lot of new home inspectors kind of enter the market coming into spring, summer, because that's when a lot of homes are being sold. So we had lots and lots and lots of current insureds to help kind of transition through renewals during the summer, but it was great.
Very nice. Yeah, education, I imagine, is big in the summer. I'm always blown away at the number of inspectors that jump in the spring and summer and they just get in and go. Like they don't even ask, some of them don't even ask questions. They just know they have to start doing inspections like tomorrow and they just jump in the busy season. It always blows my mind.
Yeah, we always hope they have mentors or did some education ahead of time. And that's how a lot of the guys that we insure are. They're really good about trying to get educated before they jump in, making sure to have a few kind of shadow inspections under their belt and unpaid inspections under their belt before they start performing paid inspections. But ultimately, those first 3 years are when you really, really learn how to inspect and what you're doing. So
absolutely. Well, let's back up and introduce you. Let you introduce yourself, tell everyone who you are, your role with the company, where you guys are located, all that good stuff.
So I'm Stephanie Jaynes. I'm the marketing director for InspectorPro Insurance that does home inspection insurance. So errors and omissions, which covers you when you're accused of missing something or leaving it out of your report, and then general liability, which is when you cause bodily injury or property damage during inspection, like by leaving the water on or by putting a foot through the ceiling. And recently, we actually started offering workers' comp to home inspectors. So if you have employees and are worried about them having business-related injuries or illnesses, workers' comp might be a good thing to look into.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. I've heard a story or two of people falling off ladders, and it just makes me cringe. But
yeah, and then there were a few stories floating around just recently about dog attacks during inspections. There's one home inspector that's recovering from some really severe injuries from that. But yeah, I mean, insurance is one of those things you get hoping you never have to use it.
Yep.
So here at InspectorPro, we try to do as much as we can to provide for those really niche home inspection needs.
Yep.
And then we try to do as much education kind of on the front end just to make sure that home inspectors are doing everything that they can to prevent claims from actually happening.
Exactly. And that's what I want to get into and what we'll talk a lot about today, which that's the part I'm excited about, is like the takeaways and the proactive things inspectors can do. Where are you guys located and how long have you been around?
So our office is based in American Fork in Utah. We have a few remote employees as well. And we serve home inspectors all over the nation. So nice. I think, yeah, we have policies in all 50 states.
Canada or no?
We used to do Canada. We don't anymore, but we do know somebody who can help you if you are Canadian.
Perfect. We'll have them reach out.
Which we refer to. We like them a lot. But yeah, so we insure home inspectors from all 50 states. And we travel all the time throughout those 50 states, going to big inspection events that are put on by associations, but also going to small chapter meetings and state association meetings and things like that, trying to educate as much as we can, give presentations, and just also support the organizations that are giving you continuing education.
Yeah, absolutely. So you guys were at ASHI, InterNACHI. I think we've seen you at a couple conferences, even seen your tables around.
Yeah, something we get told a lot is that we're everywhere, which is true.
Yep.
We're even at the shows where there are like to vendors, just because we know the people running them and want to support it. And maybe we're giving a presentation on the top 5 claims during it. You also asked how long we've been doing this. So we actually had our 10-year anniversary last month. So that's 10 years of just doing home inspection insurance, because our parent company does all sorts of other insurance. But 10 years ago, we recognized that there was a need there was basically a hole in the industry. Allen Insurance, everybody knows Bob. He was trying to fill that hole. But other than that, there wasn't really anyone in the market who was selling a product that really catered to home inspectors.
Right.
Where we get calls all the time from new home inspectors who are like, I called State Farm, I called Geico, I called all the insurance companies that I've heard of on TV, or who do my, auto or health insurance, and none of them do what you guys do. And I wish I had found you sooner. So yeah, our kind of goal is to provide insurance that meets all of the really specific needs that home inspectors have.
Yeah, absolutely. And forgive me, I'm going to sound ignorant probably asking some of these questions. So hopefully inspectors will like the fact that I'm not as educated on this as I should be, but I'm not a home inspector. I'm a software guy. So why don't the State Farms and Progressives, is it just too niche or too niche for them, or there's just nuances they don't get?
So there's a lot of reasons. So the first reason is there's actually a lot of different types of insurance. Health insurance requires a different license and different training than property and casualty insurance, which is where errors and omissions and general liability lie. The other reason is because when there is an industry that's so niche, it's really hard because you have to customize a product to fit those needs. For example, there are plenty of professions that have errors and omissions and general liability insurance, doctors, lawyers.
Right.
A doctor's needs in a lawsuit are very different than a home inspector's needs. So they can't sell the same product, which means, and every time you sell a new product in the insurance world, you have to get it approved on a state and national level by different insurance commissioners. So the barrier to entry is really high. And when it's such a niche market, optimistically, there are 40,000 home inspectors in the United States.
Right.
A lot of insurance companies say not worth it to try.
Right.
And then the last reason is because it's risky. So over 60% of home inspectors that we've insured over the past 10 years have received at least one claim. So
60%? Is that what you said, 60?
Over 60%.
Over 60. Wow. Okay. That's a good number.
So over 60% of home inspectors will receive at least one claim during their career. From an insurance standpoint, that's really risky. That's like trying to sell flood insurance to the flood states, knowing that in all likelihood, they're going to have a claim. And a lot of insurance companies who've tried to do things like that have gone bankrupt doing stuff like that because they're not prepared to kind of take on that amount of risk. So you have to be the type of insurer who kind of knows what the risks are, can build in the coverages to do it, and then frankly has enough other programs and things going on to protect it so that if really big claims do come along, we can look out for ourselves and our insureds and make sure they get paid.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I laughed initially when you said the customization for our industry, because with the software side, it's something we completely underestimated when we got into business years ago. And we were like, wow, there's so much specificity in the home inspection world that the outside world doesn't even like think about or understand. And so, yeah, we've been through the ringer in terms of building every little nook and cranny and little use cases here and there with the software. So that makes a lot of sense.
Right.
So that blows my mind. So 60% of inspectors will get one or at least a claim. One. And that's not to say it's legitimate or they end up paying any money. We're just saying a claim. Right? Yeah.
So another number to throw out there is that 80% of the claims we've received in the last 10 years have been what we would put in the meritless or frivolous claims category. So that means the technical inspection was accurate. They didn't actually miss anything, or they diagnosed the problem correctly, but they still got a claim. So being able to recognize that this is a litigious industry, not only because a lot of things can go wrong, but frankly, because there's such a disconnect between what home buyers and sellers understand to be an inspection, what their expectations are, and what the SOP actually says,
Yes.
that people still are filing complaints and claims.
Yeah, I think it's education, and that's something we noticed too in terms of like just the sheer lack of articles that explain what a home inspection is and what it covers. When we got in the industry, we were blown away, and we are like, no wonder people don't understand that it's different from an appraisal, or like no wonder people don't know what to expect. And so I think
Right.
there's a lot of work, you and I and other vendors can do in this industry to help get ahead of that. So that
And
leads.
that's one of the things that we try to do. So when I came on into as an employee at InspectorPro and in marketing, actually came from a journalism background, and they were looking for somebody to write the kind of risk management content you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But they wanted somebody who would take the time to get to know insurance and get to know home inspection, because
Mm-hmm.
that's what really makes this kind of niche market that we're in so interesting and so kind of difficult to understand. So I spent my first 6 months on the job just talking to home inspectors. So I actually worked with.
I'm sorry. Sorry for that. I'm sorry. You
Oh,
had
you're fine.
I'm kidding. I talk to home inspectors all day, so I can make these jokes. They will talk to you. They will talk and talk. Yeah.
Right, but I would talk to around 40 or 50 home inspectors a day. And
Wow.
what I was doing is helping the brokers just renew current accounts. So
Mm-hmm.
talking to guys who, some of them were brand new and had just been inspecting for a year, some of them had been inspecting over 20 years. And I just kind of got to know them, got to know kind of their pain points in the industry. And I also spent 6 months really studying our data, which we hadn't really done before. We had almost 10 years of claims data.
Oh, wow.
And we started to realize, there are things that we're learning, common issues that we're running into that home inspectors don't know about and can't know about unless we tell them. And that's kind of how we started the risk management content. We started focusing on what are the trends we're seeing in our data, and when we're talking to home inspectors day to day, and how can we give them prevention tips so we can stop claims. That's how we started our top claims against home inspectors series, which has been really popular, where we break down, okay, 10 years of data, here are the most common claims types that we receive,
Oh, that's
and
so
talk
good.
about why they're common, give examples of the actual claims. So we'll pull claims from our archives. Usually the home inspectors want to remain anonymous, but some of them have actually been really supportive and have come out and said, hey, I'll do it as long as it doesn't increase my liability, and will let us put their name on it. And we share their stories and talk about what home inspectors can learn from those stories and why those stories are kind of important to understand. So it's been really fun for us to be able to see kind of the progression of things, where before, I think even our clients were really afraid to talk about claims to us because they're afraid that their premiums are going to go up, or they're going to get fees,
Right.
or something like that. But as we've done more and more to help promote the inspection industry and promote claims prevention, we've seen home inspectors, be able to dodge really risky situations. And this will be, cross your fingers because there are a few months left, but hopefully this will be the first year in which we're starting to see, month over month, we're having more pre-claims or complaints that haven't reached the claim level.
Mm-hmm.
A claim being a written demand for money.
Right.
That actually can affect your premium.
Right.
But we're receiving more like, hey, I have this complaint, help me resolve it before it gets to the claim stage. We're receiving more of those than actual claims, which is great for the inspectors and for us. It saves all of us time and money and energy. So we're hoping that as we continue to write this risk management content, we'll be able to make a real impact in the industry that helps it become a less litigious, difficult to be in industry, because the education is out there and home inspectors know what to do. And in turn, home buyers and sellers know what to expect.
Yes, so much to dig in there. I was going to ask you how you got into insurance, and that's interesting. You came from journalism, which is outstanding. We just hired a writer on staff, and I think good writing is hard to find, especially in niche industries like this. But yeah, I was looking at your Inspector Pro's blog, and you guys have some good content on there. So anyone that's looking for that, inspectorproinsurance.com/blog, tons of good claim information, top 5 general liability claims, how to improve your marketability, common insurance policy pitfalls, great stuff on there. So yeah, we'll share the link to that in the description for sure. And I mean, for those that saw the Joe Ferry episode, he was big on resolving the pre-claims. And so just off the top of your head, I know it could maybe allude to some stuff from the blog. What are some, I guess, ways to craft the mindset for inspectors of how to think about complaints when they come in? Like what tips or advice or takeaways can we give inspectors on that front?
Yeah, so great question. So Joe Ferry has his claim intercept program, which is very similar to our pre-claims assistance. The difference being our pre-claims assistance comes with the insurance program for free.
Nice.
So if you're insured with us, you get free pre-claims assistance. That's free help stifling complaints before they turn into written demands or for money or claims from lawyers, claims adjusters. And our pre-claims assistance program has been so successful that it's actually stifled 85% of the complaints that have been submitted.
Wow. So 85% of people that write in with just a, hey, this was wrong, what can we do to fix it, never get to an official.
We're able to resolve it before it becomes an official claim.
Beautiful.
At zero cost to them, which is great.
Right.
And then the other nice thing is if it's in that 15% that does turn into a claim, they get a discount on their deductible for at least letting us try to stifle it, up to 50% discount on their deductible. So it's kind of a win-win. When it comes to what to actually do when resolving complaints, we're actually coming out with a one-pager of 7 things to do.
Nice.
When your client complains, one of which is contact your pre-claims assistance or your insurance provider if you have it, or to at least report it as an incident, because most insurance carriers do have a reporting requirement where even if it hasn't turned into a claim yet, if you think it could, you have to tell them and put them on notice.
Okay.
So that's something to be aware of. But in addition to that, we usually advise people to, first of all, never admit liability, even if you maybe did miss something or do something. First of all, most insurance carriers have in their policy that the second you admit liability, they're not required to cover you. So don't do it.
Yeah, and that's an important point, because I think, just thinking this from like a layman's standpoint, the natural inclination is for people to maybe take accountability and try to make it better, or, things you say in email can be very damaging,
Right, or over the phone or in person. Yeah. So admitting any fault before you have all the facts is never the correct thing to do, particularly because it inhibits your ability to kind of cap the demands. So I have a really good example of this. We had one home inspector who received a complaint from a client. He had missed something during the inspection, and he legitimately did miss it. He admitted that over the phone, said he'd refund the inspection fee, which he did. He didn't obtain a release of liability, which is one of the things that we help provide in these cases, because a release prevents the same claimants from coming after you about either the same issue or new issues.
Okay.
In your inspection. So it's really important. He didn't obtain a release. So 4 months later, the same claimants came back and said, hey, here's a laundry list of a bunch of other things you missed. And that's the claim that came to us. So when we went to resolve the claim in court, the issue that we ran into was because he had admitted liability for one issue, the claimant's lawyer argued, well, he admitted he missed stuff with this. We know that the inspection was bad. And because of that, he should have to pay for these other issues, even if they were out of scope and different things like that. We ended up paying a lot more on that claim than we would have had he not admitted liability and had he contacted us and we had helped him get a release in the first place.
Right. Okay.
So don't admit fault.
Yeah.
Contact your insurance and use pre-claims assistance if it's available to you.
Yep.
Make sure to gather all the facts. And after you gather the facts, go back to your office and buy yourself some time. Tell them, hey, I want to look into this. And go and look at the inspection report. If you weren't the one who inspected the home, talk to the inspector that did.
Mm-hmm.
You want to get all the information from the claimant and then compare that to your facts in the report and your pictures with the inspector themselves before you respond. Don't respond immediately over the phone.
Right.
You don't need to, and they're not really expecting you to. And then if you can go back to the property to actually re-inspect the damage that is supposedly there, that's really important.
Okay.
We have a really great, we used it in our top 5 claims presentation this year, which we're still giving this fall if we're at any events presenting. That's what you'll see. One of the claims that we talk about during that presentation is a claim for water damage in which there was a ton of water intrusion coming through the walls. And you could actually see on the day of the inspection, they had wallpaper that had some pinstriping. You can see the stripes going like this,
Mm-hmm.
just flowing from a bubble of water being underneath the wallpaper. So that was visible on the day of the inspection, and the inspector reported it. What he didn't report is the horrific water damage that was evident on the other wall right next to it. Now, the reason he didn't report it was because on the day of the inspection, and the inspector has a picture of this, there was a blanket rack strategically placed right in front of the most obvious piece of water damage, where the seller was totally blocking this wall from view. Had the blanket rack not been there, the home inspector would have for sure caught it.
Right.
It was there. And that picture was what ended up helping us defend this home inspector, was being able to show, like,
Obstructions.
hey, not only did he report on it, but B, there was a huge, huge, huge obstruction that inhibited this home inspector from being able to report on it even more.
Big.
So being able to go to the reinspection, see where it physically was, and compare his pictures, he was able to find, boom, boom. Here's a picture of the wall on the day of the inspection. Here's the picture of the wall now. Same wall. On inspection day, there was a blanket rack.
Yep.
That's why I couldn't see it.
So being thorough with obstructions, right? That would be a big takeaway there from what I'm hearing.
Yeah, and being able to, like I said, the reinspection, being able to see it in person so he could compare his documentation was part of what allowed it. If he had just, heard some wall or whatever and didn't obtain pictures from the claimant, didn't go look at it himself, he wouldn't have been able to show or prove, like, this is the same wall that was in the obstruction.
Gotcha.
So yeah, those are just a few tips. We have tons of tips on our blog. We're specifically catering to different types of claims, like water damage or roof claims or mold claims. And we also have ones catering to specific risk management techniques, like pre-inspection agreements, reports, verbal communication with clients, things like that.
Nice. Yeah, it's packed ton of information when I was skimming it. What's one of the more popular claims that people wouldn't expect? Because you mentioned roof, mold, water intrusion. Are there any on there that typically surprise people or that even surprised you when you looked at the data?
So
not to put you on the spot, you can think about it.
Well, no, totally. I mean, there were so many things that surprised us when we delved a little deeper. I think the first surprise that I had is everybody thinks mold is the most common. It's not. It's water damage. But what's interesting about mold is most of our mold claims are filed against home inspectors who do not inspect for mold and omit mold from the scope of the home inspection in their pre-inspection agreement and reports.
Interesting. Okay.
So these are clients who are filing claims against home inspectors for not finding mold when they said pretty explicitly, I'm not
a mold inspector, right? Because no one reads the agreements, probably, or most don't.
Or they kind of dismiss it. I mean, so if you read the top 5 claims article, that we did at the beginning of the year was an update to our infographic that we did in 2018. I share a story about one particular mold claim we received, and I loved the email we got from this guy. He essentially said, now I know I didn't pay for a mold inspection, and so you weren't required to inspect for molds, but I think the mold was so obvious that you should have caught it anyway. That was the email. So, I mean, but it's that kind of attitude, right? These expectations. We did, so last year we also did an article in which we interviewed recent home buyers. So I called up 6 people who had bought homes in the last year.
I love that.
And interviewed them and said, hey, what did you know about home inspections before the inspection? And what did you learn after? And there was one couple we interviewed, super type A personality, researched up the wazoo, understood home inspections to see. So they had very realistic expectations and were very satisfied. The other 5 we talked to were pretty much dissatisfied, all because they didn't really understand what was going on.
Right.
I mean, one of them actually had almost sued his home inspector. He was a lawyer. And he came so close to suing his home inspector. Thankfully, he lives in Texas. TREC does a great job of making the SOP very widely available and obvious to people. So of course, when he did research, he found it. And a lot of the issues that he ran into in his home had to do with code compliance. And one of the things TREC is really explicit about is home inspectors aren't code inspectors. But what I found interesting about what he said about kind of his story was, he said, had I known that all these things weren't included, I would have just paid more and had them included, you know? So what I love about it too is, you know, it's a disservice, not just both parties lose, you know, the clients lose because they're not getting kind of what they expect. The home inspectors lose when they have claims, but also because a lot of the times, especially if they offer additional services like code or mold or pest, there are tons of clients who are willing to do the upsell. They're willing to buy more from these home inspectors, pay more for their inspections. Had they known things weren't just automatically, magically included.
I believe, the upsell, I don't even like that word, but I think additional services is underutilized, under marketed on websites. We build websites for inspectors all the time, and it needs to be front and center, because you're right. People don't understand these things. I used to be a real estate agent, and so buyers, they literally know nothing half the time in regards to what's included. Did you guys post, was that an article or a video, those interviews, or was it more like into like just research you did interviewing home buyers?
So almost all of the articles we do involve interviews. So what I'll do when I'm writing an article is I'll find people that meet kind of our requirements, whether they're home inspectors. We've interviewed real estate agents, home buyers. I interviewed a Harvard and a Berkeley professor when we were talking about contract law. I mean, we'll interview people when it makes sense to interview them. Those home buyer interviews we didn't record. A few of them, like the lawyer, wanted to remain anonymous. So we just included it in 2 articles. So both of those articles are available on the blog.
Cool.
So I can email you the links after if you want to include them.
Nice. So it's safe to say, if we extrapolate, 1 out of 6 home buyers are not well researched or understand what's included in a home inspection based
Reverse it. 1 out of 6 knows.
Or 1 out of 6 knows.
5 out of 6 doesn't.
Okay, yeah, you're right. Good catch. 1 out of 6 buyers know something about home inspections.
And it's hardly like a statistically like significant sample. Like we weren't interviewing thousands of people. However, it was interesting to just call up 6 home buyers that we could find available and willing to interview, and just hear their feedback and their stories. Because I think when you consider who your clientele is, it's important to really know, you know, what do they expect? What do they think? So having kind of exit interviews, if you will, on behalf of home inspectors was really instructive to us. It helped us kind of know what kind of advice to put in those articles and has bled into other articles about what types of education home buyers really need.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Tell me what you think about this. So we often encourage our inspectors to write these informational or educational articles on their site, or if they don't have the articles, linked to something like, on your blog that you guys have that help educate homeowners. And we always tell them, you should be sending this stuff 1 day, 5 days, 10 days, however many days before the inspection to the home buyer. Like your reminder email should have a link in it with what to expect. Again, here's what we do, what we don't do. I'm guessing that's something you like to see or hear about as a best practice, because all it's doing is setting expectations multiple times before the inspection. Because you can't do that enough, right?
Right. Like in our experience, I mean, we don't have enough data on the before, during, and after to be able to say with absolute certainty, yes, if you do X, the result is going to be Y. However, generally speaking, one of the things that we've been able to see from our claims data and from talking to home inspectors who haven't had very many claims, because we're trying to do that as well, to kind of see, hey, you're in an area where a lot of your competitors are having claims, you don't, what's up?
Yeah.
One of the things that we've kind of learned from the data that we do have in those conversations is that the more home inspectors do communicate with their client at all 3 stages, before, during, and after, the more likely the client is to understand the scope of the inspection. And if something does go wrong, to really give the home inspectors a chance to correct the issue before just filing a claim.
Right.
And one of the things that we do is we encourage home inspectors to send pre-inspection agreements ahead of time. Almost every insurance carrier at this point requires home inspectors to obtain a signed pre-inspection agreement before every home inspection.
Oh, yeah.
Some carriers won't allow digital signatures. We do allow digital signatures. So you can get it signed ahead of time, or if the client is there day of the inspection, you can get it signed before you start inspecting.
Right.
However, more common than not now, home buyers aren't attending inspections.
Yep.
Or they show up at the end. And at that point, there's still room for education, but a lot of education will have to take place beforehand. So one of the tips that we've received from home inspectors to other home inspectors has been, do a lot of the work when you're scheduling. They have to call you or send you an email or do whatever to schedule an inspection with you. That's the perfect opportunity to start laying the foundation of, this is what my home inspection includes. This is the scope. This is the standard of practice in case you're interested in researching it and reading up on it. Here are the additional services that aren't included in my standard inspection, but you can opt into in case you're interested in having those things looked at in your home.
Love it. I love all that. And so in our software, when someone books an inspection online, there's add-ons that show up, like radon, mold. So it shows them there, just to make it explicit and clear that, hey, this isn't included in the base residential inspection. And then once inspectors click schedule, it automatically sends the agreement and asks for payment. Because I've heard a story of someone signing on site and then later saying, oh, I was under duress, or I was panicked when you put this in front of my face in the driveway.
Which we've seen.
Yeah, which there's precedence there, I'm sure, for that being a real thing. So I know we hear every so often inspectors love doing stuff on site, love doing it on paper, and we always try to caution against that and say, hey, as soon as you schedule that, 5 to 10 minutes later, it should be signed and paid for, is the hope.
From a coverage standpoint, most insurance companies don't care either way. However, if the home buyer doesn't show up at the start of the inspection, you better be ready to reschedule or cancel.
Right.
Without that signature. And that's what puts home inspectors kind of in a difficult position, is when they've booked their schedule, they've scheduled this thing, denied maybe some other offers to do jobs because this was scheduled. Are you willing to walk away if you're relying on the signature on the day of? Yeah. If the answer is no, definitely look into some e-signature options, because
Yep.
That's your only guarantee of not having to walk away.
You mentioned the communication piece, and I don't think I'm going out on a limb here by saying home inspectors sometimes are not the greatest communicators, and that's okay. They, you know, some of them come from the trades, they come from other industries where they didn't necessarily have to deal with customers or provide customer service. So we always, you know, guide and kind of coach on that of over communicating. But I think you underscore something important with like automation, with like, okay, say you're not the best on the phone, or say you're not able to articulate these things on the phone. It should also be in writing on your website, in your emails. If you have, you know, an assistant or call center doing all these things to educate people, if you're not the one doing it yourself. But I wanted your opinion on, we are seeing kind of a new breed of home inspectors that come from other areas of life, come from business backgrounds, come from service backgrounds, that are like amazing communicators. And I've been blown away by some of these inspectors that they talk to someone in the driveway for 10 or 15 minutes before the inspection. Afterwards, they debrief and they really explain everything. Are you seeing, I guess, a uptick or just a different type of inspector over the last couple of years? Because it's something we've definitely noticed, just more business savvy, more, I guess, articulate, able to communicate, more in touch with the buyer's like feelings and emotions.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think just like every profession, there are some home inspectors that are stellar communicators. There are some that aren't. And that's true of any job position. We've insured plenty of home inspectors and continue to insure plenty of home inspectors who've been in the business forever. And the reason they have is because they're stellar communicators. But when it comes to the crop of new inspectors coming in, we have noticed an uptick in, well, less so. It's just been something that's more on our radar, actually, because of an article that we did recently. So we did an article on hiring. How do you hire a new home inspector? Like if you're expanding into a multi-inspector firm, what are the qualities to look for? When I scheduled those initial interviews with home inspectors who owned multi-inspector firms, like many journalists, I thought I knew what they were going to say, right? I had an expectation, but I always go in open-minded. So I asked open-ended questions about what they were looking for, and to my surprise, they told me things I wasn't expecting. What I was expecting was, I expected them to say, yeah, we're looking for a technical background. We want builders, we want people in construction, we want woodworkers, we want people who are already used to working with their hands. I thought that was the type of person that these multi-inspector firms were going to tell me they were looking for, but it wasn't. The guys that I was talking to talked about the importance of finding good communicators and good people. And one of the guys I talked to talked about how he's always looking for somebody to hire, and he'll go to the same coffee shops or restaurants with his wife and like watch servers and how they kind of communicate and interact with people.
Right.
Or like same with the guy who's making his coffee and different things like that. He is looking for people in customer service kind of outward facing positions who are doing a good job. They're kind of going above and beyond, who are naturally conversationalists. Because in his words, he said, I can train the technical stuff. I can't train the communication stuff. I can't change the personality. And yeah, it was eye-opening to me, having had a totally different expectation. But I think a lot of people are finding that to be true. Being a home inspector is so much more than just finding defects in a home. You're a communicator, but beyond that, you're a business owner. You're the HR person, you're the accountant, you're the marketer, you're literally everything, especially for these guys who are sole proprietors. And frankly, the vast majority of our insureds are sole proprietors. So they're one inspector shops, or they're just a handful. We have a couple of multi-inspector firms that are in the double digits with the number of inspectors that they employ and send out. But the average home inspector that we help is one person doing all the work.
Yep.
So it requires a vast variety of skills that I think a lot of outsiders don't appreciate. Home inspectors have to be incredibly talented at a lot of things. And that's frankly what makes them so fun to work with, is just how much knowledge they have, not just about home inspecting, but about literally everything when it comes to owning a business.
They have so much to juggle. I don't know how they do it. A lot of them have good men and women behind them, the husbands, wives that help out, which is great. But yeah, the one that solely does it on their own, I don't know how they do it all. So speaking of the sole proprietor, what are some of the common misperceptions that an inspector has when they come to you all, or some of the common questions that they come up to you with?
Yeah, so there are a lot of things. I mean, insurance is difficult to understand. Coming from a non-insurance background initially, I was surprised at all of the things I went home and found in my health insurance policy after studying Arizona emissions and general liability policies. You know, the information I learned just part of my training, I wanted to make sure I knew the insurance side as thoroughly as possible. So I got licensed, and I'm continuing to do insurance continuing education just so I can keep on top of all of the nuances to it. And really the misperceptions here at InspectorPro, we call them policy pitfalls. They're things that home inspectors maybe assume or get kind of caught up on because they're not familiar with the insurance industry. And frankly, insurance policies are like 80 pages long.
Yeah.
And just like we're critical of, you know, home buyers maybe not having the time to read the full report, frankly, most home inspectors aren't reading the full policy. And even if they do, there's so much jargon in there that we totally understand when it's difficult, which is why we're trying to publish more and more material on understanding insurance basics too. So common policy pitfalls that we talk about, we actually wrote about the 3 most common ones in our blog post on August 1st. The first one is the insurance carrier doesn't cover it. So similar to the standard home inspection, not including mold, the standard home inspection insurance policy doesn't include mold unless you add it. It's an exclusion. These are portions of your policy that define what you're not covered to inspect. Some exclusions are permanent, while others can be modified with an endorsement. So an example of a permanent one is you're going to have a really rough time trying to find a home inspection policy that covers asbestos,
right,
pollution, or improper licensure or warranty claims. These are things that home inspection insurance policies just don't cover. It's out of the scope. Now, the kind of optional stuff, those can be added in by endorsements. And that kind of leads me to my second policy pitfall. Non-inspection isn't protection. Let's use mold just because it's a common one.
Right.
So endorsements are amendments to your policy that modify coverage, usually by adding additional coverage or changing the exclusion. So an example would be standard home inspection insurance policy doesn't include mold, but you can add an endorsement so that it does. The reason we say non-inspection isn't protection is a lot of home inspectors think when they're buying their insurance coverage for the year, just like your report writing software allows home inspection clients to go in and check the mold box if they want mold included in inspection. They have the same option when they apply for insurance. They can check the mold box, check pest, pool, radon. A lot of home inspectors don't because they're like, well, I don't inspect for mold, or I don't do radon inspections, so I'm not going to check the box. The problem is, if you don't check the box, you don't have protection for those claims that come in. Even if the claim is frivolous, if you don't have mold coverage, you don't have mold coverage for frivolous or merit or claims with merit.
Like the example you alluded to where the guy thought he should have called out the need to inspect for mold when he didn't, right?
Right, and that's why we use the mold example so frequently, is because most mold claims are against home inspectors who aren't inspecting for it. It actually makes a lot of sense to carry mold coverage even if you're not inspecting for it, just because it's one of the common claims.
Because to me, that seems like a big gray area, or you can tell me which way it typically falls or if you have data on it. But yeah, for a home buyer to say, yeah, I know you can't tell me if that's mold or not, but you should have said it requires further evaluation. Like I could see both sides to that.
And yeah, there are definitely ways that you can limit your liability. That's one of the things that we go over in our article specifically on
Oh, nice.
avoiding mold claims. We talk about what to do when you are inspecting for mold, how to avoid the claim, and then when you aren't, because that's frankly more important with this type of claim. And one of the things is how to report on it without unintentionally setting the expectation that you were looking for it, right? So
Right. Yeah.
The further evaluation bit. But yeah, so just because endorsements like mold, pest, radon, pool and spa, equipment coverage, drone coverage are optional doesn't mean they're unnecessary. They're not synonyms in this case. They're essential if you're going the extra mile and offering those additional services, and they're important if you just want the coverage.
Right.
So if you're worried about pest claims, even if you're not inspecting for pest, get it. Because if you get a claim with or without merit, you don't have coverage unless you have the endorsement. So that's a really important thing to know.
Yeah. Well, is radon even tell me if this is just a bad example. If you don't do radon, but you're in a high radon area, would it make sense to have coverage for that? Or is that typically?
Potentially. So, I mean, when it comes to insurance, there are a few things that we tell people to look at when buying their insurance, because I can't tell people what to buy. It really comes down to what does your state require?
Right.
And then what's your exposure? And by exposure, that's like how much gross revenue are you making year over year? And then how many inspections are you performing? Because there is a direct correlation between the number of inspections and the amount of money you're making and the number of claims. The more inspections, the more likely you're going to receive a claim.
Gotcha.
Because you have more opportunities to receive one.
Right.
So something to keep in mind. And then what helps you sleep at night, ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
We call that risk tolerance. It's how much you're willing to leave to chance versus how much you want to protect yourself. And that's a totally individual thing. There are some home inspectors we know who carry really low limits, meaning the amount of money the insurance company will pay for them for their claims annually is very low.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason they're comfortable carrying those low limits is they say, well, I'm more comfortable putting the money away in a savings account for a rainy day, or I'm just that convinced I'm not going to get sued.
Right.
There are other people who have really low exposure. They're not performing a lot of inspections. Their state actually doesn't have insurance requirements, or the requirements are very low, but they're carrying millions of dollars in coverage. Why? It's because they want the peace of mind associated with having that insurance. So when it comes to whether or not to carry radon or any of those endorsements, it's really what helps you sleep at night, your exposure, state requirements, and then I'd add in what claims are common. Radon, at least us personally, we almost never see radon claims. They're not that common.
Because you can't see it, right? Maybe that's why. I don't know.
Well,
it's a weird mystery thing to a lot of people.
You can't see it. I mean, most claims come in after you encounter a problem.
Mm-hmm.
If a radon problem is that extreme, usually they will have found it before you get there, right?
Right.
But it's just not within the top 5 or even the top 12 claims that we receive. So,
yeah.
Whereas mold, it's number 4 out of 12.
Okay, good to know.
Pest is number 7. So those are some where it's like, okay, depending on my area, looking at what's just statistically significant within kind of my industry, those are the endorsements I'll pick, maybe even if I don't offer it.
Gotcha.
And then the last pitfall that I would mention has to do with insurance limits. We talked about your limits are the total dollar amount your insurance company is going to pay toward a covered claim during a policy period. The thing we are trying to educate people on quite recently is that $1 million might not be $1 million depending on how your policy was written.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because of 2 things called sublimits and shared limits. So sublimits We don't have either of these things, but we see them in quotes that home inspectors receive. They're like, why is this quote I got so cheap? And we're like, well, sublimits is a good example. Sublimits cap certain risks, usually additional services like mold or pest or radon defined in your insurance policy. So they masquerade kind of as cheaper, broader policies by offering you ancillary services with less coverage per individual service. So say you purchased $1 million in insurance coverage, but there's a piece of paper 40 pages into your insurance policy that says limited mold coverage endorsement. And it says in the fine print, hey, I know you bought $1 million in coverage, but we're actually only going to cover mold up to $100,000. The reason that can be an issue is, again, if you're worried about some of those higher risk claims, you're not getting all the coverage you paid for. And in certain states like Florida has a requirement for $1 million minimum if you're inspecting for mold. You're not compliant if you have a policy with a sublimit.
That's great to know. And I think that's just a broader best practice, and something I've even implemented in my life. If something seems too cheap and too good to be true, it's like, okay, maybe I should read into this a little more.
Right.
I know that happened with mortgage rates a lot. I would tell buyers, they were like, oh, this company's offering me this mortgage rate, and it's like below, like, well below the national average. I'm like, well, there's probably some fees tacked on the back end to get you with it. So
right. Or exclusions. I mean, ultimately, if you're getting a quote that's hundreds of dollars cheaper than what you've been seeing throughout the industry, it's usually just because it has less coverage.
Makes sense.
Another example is the shared limits. So we talked earlier about how there are two major types of coverage. There's the errors and omissions and general liability, and they cover different types of claims. Now, usually insurance companies will give you separate limits. So you have $1 million for the year toward any errors and omissions claims you get, and you have $1 million toward any general liability claims that you get. What some companies will do to, again, reduce the amount of coverage they're giving you and maybe give you a little cheaper rate is they'll combine those limits. So we're only paying $1 million for all the claims you receive.
Gotcha.
And the only issue with that is if you get a big E&O claim and then you get a GL claim in the same year, if you've already run out of your limits with that E&O claim, you don't have any more coverage for the GL claim.
Right.
So it's just something to keep in mind. No,
that's good. You broke that down in simplistic terms to where even I can understand it. So I'm sure inspectors will be able to understand it.
Good.
That's good. Any other kind of basics that inspectors kind of gloss over or tend to just overlook?
I would say the other thing that is important to know, and we kind of touched on this earlier, is don't try to solve complaints before reporting it to your insurance provider. A lot of people do that to, they think they'll avoid fees or premium increases, or they're just scared we're kind of penalize them for having a complaint in the first place. But the reality is your insurance contract requires you to report it, number one. But number two, your insurance company, if you have a good one, is there to help you. Like we talked about pre-claims assistance earlier.
Yeah.
Statistically speaking, we're able to close claims months, sometimes years faster if we get notified promptly. Right. The claims that drag out, the claims that are really expensive, are the ones where the inspector tried to do something ahead of time, didn't work out, and then it gets put on our lap. And in those cases, I mean, the first battle we have to fight isn't even with the claimant, it's with their insurance carrier saying, please let us cover it, because technically they don't have to. A good example of that is we received a roofing claim not long ago where there were roofing defects leading to leaks. Super common claim, second most common claim type that we receive, actually, roof associated with water damage. Instead of letting us know, first of all, the home inspector admitted fault. Second,
it's a no-no.
he said, I'll fix it. He
Oh,
had a roofer in his network that he knew. And he's like, hey, I know this guy. He's really great. He's going to fix your roof. I'm going to pay for it. And after that, it's not going to leak anymore. Well, of course, there were more leaks. So by the time he notified us, the claimant had come to him the second time. By now, they went from upset to furious.
yeah.
Because they were promised the problem would go away. It hadn't. Not only were they going after him in a lawsuit, but they were also filing a complaint with the state licensing board, trying to revoke his license. It got really ugly. We ended up being able to settle the claim for half of their initial demand, but had he came to us the first time, there were things about the claim against him that were frankly out of scope. There were things about the defects that showed up after weather and in places that he honestly wouldn't have been able to see. Our claims teams think that had they been told at the beginning, maybe they could have stifled it for the cost of the inspection fee or nothing at all. But because he
Tried to do it,
issue,
yeah.
it just became a much more expensive ordeal than it needed to be.
And you guys are incentivized, insurance companies are incentivized to handle it before it gets to a claim. And so like that,
totally.
you're on their team, and that's I guess that puts it into context, and it makes it very clear, like you guys are on their team.
Yeah, and not every insurance carrier has pre-claims assistance. That's why, Joe Ferry exists, for example, is because it's not something that every insurance company does. We've had people switch to us because they had a claim with they had what we would qualify as a pre-claim with their past insurer. And they called them hoping they would get some help because they heard about what we do for our inspectors. And the claims adjuster was essentially like, well, call us when it's a written demand for money. Like you did what you had to do, which was notify us, you're compliant, but we're not going to do anything to help you until it's actually a demand.
Wow.
Which is why that inspector ended up switching to us, because he was like, I felt so abandoned
Yeah.
in my time of need. So yeah, it's definitely important to find a company that you feel good about and trust to kind of have your back, and then to use the resources that they give you to kind of avoid that liability or limit your liability.
Makes a ton of sense. I want to be respectful of your time. We're bumping up against time here, but is there anything I didn't bring up or ask you that you wanted to cover, or any kind of parting, words of wisdom for inspectors that are thinking about the liability side of the business? Besides follow your blog, besides read everything that you guys.
Yeah, definitely do that. I mean, the thing that I would say is, regardless of whether you're insured with us, we love and support the industry, and our goal with these risk management articles that we write and the appearances that we do on podcasts and in webinars is to hopefully give home inspectors the tools they need to prevent claims and protect their businesses, and also the tools they need to make educated insurance purchasing decisions. Because the last thing we want to have happen is home inspectors get claims that they could have stopped from happening, or home inspectors buy insurance policies that don't meet their needs. Both those things are avoidable a lot of the time, and if we can help you avoid them, we want to. So definitely check out our blog, definitely check out our articles in the ASHI Reporter, the CREIA Inspector. We have tons of articles in various newsletters. And if you have any questions, again, regardless of whether you're insured with us, feel free to reach out. We answer home inspector questions from insureds and non-insureds all the time.
I love it. I really appreciate that. It's an approach we take where it's like, we just want people to make good decisions and be informed about everything. So I really respect it. So, all right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to educate. My brain hurts, so I'm going to go research some E&O limits and brush up on this stuff, because I want to be educated about it. So I want people to make good decisions. So thank you so much for the time. I will link to kind of everything we talked about, the
great.
description and yeah, hopefully this was helpful to everybody.